and welcome to a quick discussion of Pikmin 2. This is the most polarizing Pikmin game, and is often considered the worst game of the original trilogy. I still like it a lot, and plan to do a new Let's Play of this someday, but for now I wanted to quickly go over some of my thoughts on this game. Earlier this year, I redid my Let's Play of the first Pikmin, via the new Play Control version. So I do still plan to go through this game through the Wii version, but I also wanted to test capturing GameCube games because I finally have a way to capture GameCube footage again. So Pikmin 2 is very, very difficult, and in some ways, it's kind of like the Super Mario Sunshine of the series, if you consider the first Pikmin the 64 of the series. I guess that would also make Pikmin 3 the Galaxy of the series, which honestly makes a lot of sense. Basically, this game takes a lot of the core mechanics, adds a bunch of new features, and also increases the difficulty a bunch. So a lot of people think this is the toughest Pikmin game, and that is definitely a fair assumption. In some ways, this game actually is more forgiving than the original Pikmin, which basically allows them to increase the difficulty too much. So this game is divided into two styles of gameplay. So you have the above-ground gameplay, which plays a lot like the original. So you have these larger open areas, you have a time limit of roughly 13 minutes or so, to basically find a bunch of key items, in this case, treasures instead of parts for Olimar's ship. So you have to find all the treasures in order to pay back a debt. And then there are plenty of underground areas that connect to the above ground through special cave entrances. The underground gameplay is where things start to unravel a bit, because I actually think the above-ground gameplay is fairly strong, with the addition of, multiple captains to divide up tasks, new Pikmin types like the purple Pikmin that are good for defeating enemies and carrying heavier objects, and then the white Pikmin that are faster and can dig up hidden items and also survive poison. So at its core, Pikmin 2 isn't bad. The main issue is just how imbalanced the underground areas are. So if you enter an underground area, it's divided into several floors usually. These floors are often randomly generated based on a few set patterns. So a lot of times they'll have the same enemies, but where they'll appear is completely randomized. This can create a lot of problems with certain treasures being actually very difficult to obtain if they're really far away from where you need to be. Or from where, like, the ship is to actually store the part, or the treasure in this case. So this creates problems because I've actually had this happen. You can actually lose access to certain items, and then you basically have to either reset or restart the entire underground section over again. With the autosave at the beginning of every floor, this allows them to basically throw a lot at the player, and oftentimes it's so much that it's generally seen as unfair, and I cannot argue with that, because this game does not hold back. Basically, the amount of nonsense you have to deal with is very high, with things like falling rocks, bombs dropping out of the sky, enemies falling. So in general, actually navigating all of the challenges is very difficult. Because the onions don't come along with you, you also don't have access to the onions, and thus can't grow more Pikmin when you're underground. So the 100 or so Pikmin you enter with are the Pikmin you have for the duration, unless you find a candy pop bud that allows you to make more Pikmin. So basically the underground sections are very, very relentless, and are the main reason why this game is so disliked. The level of polish is actually fine for the most part. I actually think it's a lot less glitchy than the first game, without like constantly worrying about Pikmin getting crushed, and things like that. So in general, fewer things go wrong in terms of glitches, but a lot can go wrong in terms of the actual gameplay. There are also items called sprays that can be used to power up Pikmin, or immobilize enemies by turning them into stone. And while these are great, they also kind of fall into that category of items that definitely feel like they're there almost to make things a little bit less impossible, instead of being like actually balanced. And I do think that's my biggest issue with this game, it's balance. If everything was built around actually being fair to the player, and not just kind of feeling like either being really difficult or basically making the game easier to compensate, I think I would like the difficulty better. With the auto-saving on every floor, that definitely feels like the equivalent of games where you basically have an extra life right before like a one-hit kill area. So it's like they realize this is going to be very bad, so they basically put the extra life there, so you won't like completely get walled in that area. So I get why it's done that way, but I definitely prefer when games are just more balanced inherently, instead of trying to basically give you like free extra lives and things like that to make up for how brutally difficult things are. So yeah, in general, despite all of that, I still really like this game. I like a lot of the mechanics and how it's a little bit more polished. I feel like even things like throwing Pikmin is a bit faster, and they also don't trip as much. And I do like the general gameplay of it, even though some of the randomization of the underground areas and some of the random elements like obstacles can be very annoying to deal with. I still think this is a very fun game for the most part, until you get to one of the really difficult and annoying sections where you have to reset the game until you get a favorable pattern, or until you can actually get through with enough Pikmin to actually handle the next challenge. I definitely think it is the weakest of the original Pikmin games. I say the original Pikmin games, and then I realized there were only 3 and 1 spin-off, so it's kind of weird talking about, like, the original trilogy because there isn't anything past that at this point. So yeah, in general, this is the Pikmin game that's, like, the least easy to recommend, because of how crushingly difficult it can be. As long as you actually use the resets a lot, and play very carefully in underground areas, it's actually not too difficult, and you can definitely get used to it. But again, it definitely feels like it's less polished, and more haphazard by comparison. And then Pikmin 3 is honestly really great. There's a reason why, even though I've never done a Let's Play of it, I've already done multiple one-off videos just because I really like Pikmin 3 a lot, and I can't wait to eventually get to that. But first, I do want to go back to this game. This was actually the second game I ever did a Let's Play of, so it's very nostalgic. And again, that's a big part of why I can probably overlook a lot of this game's issues, is because of nostalgia. But I still think, even if it wasn't for nostalgia, I think I'd still like this game just because I do like the core gameplay of Pikmin. That definitely does not apply to everybody, as there are plenty of Pikmin fans who cannot stand this game, and that is completely valid. But even if you don't like this game, I would still recommend trying Pikmin 3, because that is actually a phenomenal game. Like, straight up one of the best games on the Wii U. Not that that's as much of an accomplishment because it's the Wii U. But still, I do think Pikmin 3 is an actually fantastic game, and I would recommend it either on Wii U or Switch. Both versions are totally fine. Whenever I do a Let's Play of this, it'll be the Switch version because it'll be more convenient. When I get to this game, it'll be the Wii version because convenience. But I do have a way to capture GameCube games now. I did before, but it wasn't ideal. Like, the frame rate would be cut to 30 instead of 60. Not that it would matter too much in this game, it's mostly menus that are 60 for this game. But also the picture quality is a little bit clearer. So I'm actually capturing this off of S-Video instead of composite cable, so it looks a little bit clearer. And yeah, all the color balancing looks right, and the frame rate is correct. So yeah, I can actually capture GameCube games again. And this was sort of a test to see how well this turns out. If the video quality turns out well for this, you can definitely expect more GameCube Let's Plays in the future. I don't have as many GameCube games as I used to. I definitely sold too many of them. I wish I had held on to games like Kirby Air Ride because of how ridiculously rare it is. But I would like to eventually build up my collection again, someday very slowly because of how expensive GameCube games are. And someday go through games like Kirby Air Ride for Let's Plays and things like that, now that I can actually capture this reliably. So yeah, in general, I do still like Pikmin a lot. The whole series is pretty good, even though this game is definitely one of the weaker entries for all of the reasons I've mentioned. I still enjoy it enough, but I can't really recommend it very easily. If you play Pikmin, like, on the Wii Virtual Console, you might not, you might want to skip Pikmin 2. Story-wise, there isn't a ton to this series, it's very gameplay-focused anyway, so if you skip a game, you're not gonna miss out on a ton of lore, or well, some lore, but not a whole lot. And yeah, Pikmin 3 is definitely a lot more manageable, especially on Switch where there are difficulty settings and other quality of life improvements to make it a lot more beginner-friendly. In some ways, I'd actually recommend Pikmin 3 first, because of how much better it's aged. And how much more readily accessible the game is because it's on Switch. This game being on Wii U at the latest, it's a little bit tougher to play. I would love to see a re-release of both of these two games, especially now that GameCube re-releases on Switch are possible after Sunshine was brought over to the 3D All-Stars collection. So yeah, someday I hope more GameCube games eventually make it over, depending on when I schedule this upload, and when I'm actually recording this, this might age very badly. I actually don't know when I'm going to put this video up, so it might go up after E3, in which case this might be very awkward depending on what they announce. So yeah, in general, I definitely like the Pikmin series a lot. It's one of my favorite, like, overlooked or, like, less, mainstream Nintendo series. I even like Hey Pikmin, even though that game is kind of a mess just because of being, like, also kind of having balance problems, or certain enemies being very overpowered and tough to deal with. I definitely feel like this countdown is faster on this game rather than the original, and I don't know why, because I'm pretty sure the days are almost the same length. I think the timer just starts later or something, I'm actually not sure. So that was a quick look at Pikmin 2. Again, someday I would definitely like to get around to a full Let's Play of this game because of how old my original Let's Play was, and how much I actually do like this game despite its flaws. Probably not this year though, because I already did Pikmin 1 this year, so maybe sometime in 2022, but either way, I hope you enjoy that playthrough whenever it happens. And in the meantime, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another discussion.